Thank you very much. Our second speaker in this session will be Professor Gershon Hundert. If we keep tradition of naming people by the title of their most famous book, we would have problem what to choose. But possibly it might be Mr. Professor Evil Encyclopedia of Jews in Eastern Europe, or maybe Jews in Poland and Lithuania in the 18th century, Genealogy of Modernity, and several other publications. Professor Hundert is a professor of Jewish Studies and History at McGill University, Montreal, Canada, by which I correct the mistake from yesterday when Canada was not listed among countries where from our speakers come. Right? He's also, as I said, editor of the Evil Encyclopedia of Jews in Eastern Europe, editor of the volume on essential papers on Hasidism, the volume on Polish Jewish Socialists, the failure of ideal, and author of many other publications. His presentation today is entitled Jews and Other Poles, Problems of Language. And I would like to note that this famous title is also the title for this session in some transformation.
Thank you. We continually learn that there are not enough happy occasions in life, and this is what I call a Shehechianu moment for me, and I'm feeling blessed to be part of this celebration of the careers of this moment in the careers of Maria and Gershon. I'm very glad to be a part of it. I feel like I have to, before I start reading my talk, I have to recall the mediocre tenor in Milano who learned one aria and appeared and sang the aria, and the audience kept yelling encore, 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 and finally said, "Prego, I only know one aria," and someone yelled from the audience, "You'll sing it till you get it right." So that concerns the talk that I'm presenting. I'm looking at the attitudes of Jews. The paper is a kind of footnote to a paper that Moshe published some years ago. I want to look at the attitudes of Jews to their Christian neighbors and their Christian environment in the 18th century Polish Commonwealth. And I'm going to argue that there's a lot of variegation in the attitudes of early modern Polish Lithuanian Jews to their neighbors, and that these cannot be reduced to simple formulae. Looked at together, the teachings of the church and the teachings of the synagogue have a certain symmetry. The religious law and the traditions of Jews, no less than the canon law and the traditions of Christians, sought to limit contacts with outsiders of the other religion. Each group depicted the other as an undifferentiated collectivity, naturally hostile and worse. The norms of both the church and the synagogue were strongly segregationist in intent. Each faith taught that the other was spiritually and morally inferior. This is a kind of very quick summary of the norms of Christianity and Judaism. My concern is, of course, with the actual attitudes of a particular Jew in a particular time and place, and they're based on the published and unpublished writings of the aforementioned, as before I started talking, Dov Ber-Birkenthal of Bolechu, 1723 to 1805. He wrote 2 books in Hebrew, neither of which has been published in full yet. One is a history of messianic movements called Divrei Binah, and the other is a sort of memoir, but we don't have the title page of that book. These books are particularly precious because they were written by a layperson. Most books were written by Jews at the time, were written by rabbis. Moreover, we have very little written by Christian burghers in the 18th century. Birkenthal was a wine merchant who traveled to Hungary and sold his goods mainly to noblemen and prominent or high-ranked churchmen. While his home was in Bolechu, he spent most of his life and conducted his business in Lviv, and as a result of his commercial activities, he came into contact with Polish merchants, nobles, Catholic clergy, and businessmen from numerous European states. He learned a number of languages, including Polish, Latin, French, and German. In this, he was unusual, but far from unique among the Jews of the period. So I am engaged in a micro-historical analysis of the discursive practice of one 18th century Jew in his depiction of Christians. Birkenthal had a lot to say about Christianity, and this comes as a consequence of his own self-reported experience. Probably the most dramatic event in his life, and certainly the point at which he touches the larger historical narrative, is his service as the translator to Polish of Rabbi Chaim Rappaport's answers to the Frankists, who accused Jews of using Christian blood in their rituals in a public disputation in the cathedral in Lviv in 1759. Birkenthal was 36 years old at that time, and this was a critical event in his life. And it's probably as a result of that experience that he composed his history of Messianism.
85% of all the Shia remain within 19th century political boundaries. And this is showing how political categories can be traced not on the declaration.
He's concerned to defend Judaism in general and the oral Torah in particular in the face of polemical remarks by Christians. He tells his readers that he had frequent contact with Christian laymen and priests and often entered their homes. He says, "Umidei yom mamash," they would demean Judaism. "V'livli chok hayu pihem negdenu poharim uvegalva uvoz etek alenu dovrim." The rhyming is deliberate. "Ein lechem pela hashiv v'lo rosh leharim v'yiskei v'inyanei ha'emunah. Kvar ovda mikem chochmatchem naktuma ve'ein od lachem ish hayodea adma v'chochmot elokiyot v'tiviot. Atem kulam nevuchim ve'ein nishar bachem ki'im atalmud lachem v'hatot v'lahadiach etchem beguzmaot v'rov divrei shkarim." Birkenthal characterizes Christianity and Islam as scriptural religions. He uses the word Toraniyim, good luck translating that, a term with a positive valence, and it's similar to terms used by Jacob Emden, whom Birkenthal never mentions, and uses but he uses about the same terminology, and Moshe Hagiz, whom Bear quotes extensively, seems to have had a similar attitude to scriptures of, at least of Christianity. Bear says, however, that the Christian Bible has been corrupted in transmission by forging priests of many nations. V'chein ha'yishmaelim kak Muhammad hanal af sheyesh ba'al Koran shelehem ksat mitorat Moshe gam ken mezuyaf u'me'orav im limudei shkarim de Muhammad hanavi sheker shelehem. Birkenthal nevertheless asserts that these books support the Torah of Moses, and he says, "V'hinei gam elu sifrei avon evangelion dehanotzrim atzmam machzikim Torat Moshe u'meidim sheyeshu hanotzri atzmo he'id shehu ba lekayem Torat Moshe v'lo levot lo chas v'shalom kamuvoar ba'ezo mekomot b'sifreihem anal Mateush kapitel Hey pasuk Yud Zayin," which is correct. He goes on to say that he presented this question to the priest, Gaudenty Pikulski, quote, the author of the book Jewish Malice, in Polish Złość Żydowski, and he responds to my question in that book on page 435, end quote. And indeed, on page 435, Pikulski cites this question, attributing it to Jeden Żyd Velevovia. Elsewhere, Birkenthal says that he is convinced that just as the idolatrous nations disappeared, the same fate will befall the Christians. And Birkenthal regularly refers to Christians using the demeaning term tifle. The assertive rhetoric of religious superiority and the energetic disavowal of Christianity's message that characterizes Birkenthal's remarks are veiled expressions of anxiety and imply that he attributes real power to Christianity. Despite his negative characterization of Christianity, when Birkenthal depicts himself relating to individual Christians, the tone is quite different. That is, while Birkenthal uses his chronicling as a vehicle for the expression of his disaffection, at the same time he presents his own life and his own relations with others in a complex way. Even in the early centuries of the modern era, confessional difference was not necessarily decisive in determining the nature of every relationship between a Jew and a Christian. The character of the encounter could have been shaped primarily by its being between a man and a woman, between two travelers far from home, two prisoners in a jail, and so on. We multiply the examples. The one I want to give here is Birkenthal's account of how he began to learn German. At 26, Birkenthal learned to write German from a learned young Saxon called Labadie, the clerk of a merchant with whom Birkenthal was doing business. Labadie asked that Birkenthal teach him Hebrew in return. So they each copied the relevant alphabet and proceeded to instruct each other, and he says, Acharei shelamad ha'alef bet im nekudotav, me alef bet hanipas b'zhokva, v'kaniti lo gam סידור תפילה, שראיתי שההראל הזה חפץ מאוד ללמוד לשון עברי. וכן, הלימוד הזה נעשה בינינו משך 6 ימים, ואינו כל היום, רק לאיזה רגעים ושעות פנויות ביום כשלא בא איזה קונה לראות מסחורתם, או איזה שבא אליי לקח יין, ובזמן קצר כזה תפסתי התחלה מרובה לכתב ולשון אשכנזי. וההראל הנ"ל תפס התחלה טובה ומרובה לכתב ולשון העברי. Jacob Emden similarly claims that he learned German in a very short time. He quotes, as if I had a teacher of this for several years, end quote. Emden explains that his acquisition of German was as a result of his desire, quote, שלא להיות ערום מחוכמת אנשי עולם, וגם שלא להיחשב סקל בעיניהם. שחל, תודה. שחל בעיניהם. That's obviously the end of the quote. This latter concern with embarrassment, so characteristic of a certain group of Jews in this period, never appears in Birkenthal's writings. As a result of his knowledge of German, Birkenthal's dwelling in Lviv became a place where German merchants gathered regularly for learned discussions. If we look at the terminological distinctions made by the author, we find, unsurprisingly, that in designating an individual, and I counted 300 as quantitative, I counted 300 such occasions. In all but 3 of those 300, the reader is never in doubt as to whether the person is a Jew or not. And with the exception of magnates and other powerful noblemen, this means that the author includes the term arel or Bar-Ilan, along with language indicating the occupation or national origin of the person. He refers, for example, to Arelim Rusin, Arel Amalek, ask me about it if you want to know what that is, Arel Ashkenazi, Arel Hagar Tzoref Kesef, and interestingly enough, Arelim Upritzim. In fact, on only 6 occasions did I find noblemen designated by the term Arel, and never in the case of the most powerful ones, who are called the Duke, the Lord, the Powerful, and so on. Birkenthal refers to people as Poles only on those few occasions when he's contrasting them with Russians. He refers to Rusins or Ruthenians on only one occasion, when he mentions Rusins from the mountains, ruffians called Oprishki. Ukraine, for Birkenthal, is strictly a geographical designation. What is noteworthy is Birkenthal's readiness at times to express esteem for Gentiles and for their wisdom and even for their virtues. My hypothesis is that in his writings the term Arel should not be understood as necessarily pejorative. It may even be said, at least at times, to have a certain discursive neutrality. In the course of the surviving pages of the memoir, Birkenthal reports interacting with 173 Jews and more than 113 Christians. That is, roughly 40% of the conversations that he chooses to mention are with not Jews. There are, of course, all sorts of qualifications that should be applied to this very gross statistic, but nevertheless it affirms that his network of contacts was profoundly heterogeneous. If he is boasting or exaggerating in reporting so many encounters of this kind, particularly with magnates and educated Christian merchants, this is itself significant because it means that interactions with higher status Gentiles garnered positive cultural capital in 18th century Jewish-Polish society. I would like to draw your attention to two passages, both concerned with describing in biblical language the sort of person who should be selected to serve in a role of leadership, the sort of person that should be selected to serve in a role of leadership that required skill and judgment. The first passage, he says, the choice was made, מפי הוועד הגדול נבחרו אנשים אנשי חיל יראי אלוקים, אנשי אמת שונאי בצע. That's the first passage. The second passage says the choice was of אנשים חכמים וידועים, אנשי אמת שונאי בצע. In the first passage, he's talking about the noblemen who were elected to the Crown Tribunal. The Crown Tribunal sat in Lublin and for a brief time in Lviv. In the second, he's describing the choice of the leaders of the Council of Four Lands. So this suggests that Birkenthal had, at least at times, a healthy respect for the political institutions of the Polish Commonwealth. Moreover, Birkenthal invokes the authority of contemporary Gentile scholars who have studied ancient books and whose research has led them to deny utterly the tales of miracles in the Christian Bible because they're contrary to nature. And he adds, הגיעו לידי גם ספרים המועתקים בלשון אנגלתרה, ממחברים חכמים גדולים שלקטו מאמרים הרבה מספרי תורתנו ונביאנו מהתנ"ך, ושאר ספרי קודש המזכירים מסיפורי דברי הימים ומעשי עולם, וחיברו עם דברי הימים דאומות העולם. כאשר יש להם אוצרות ואספות ספרים הרבה אומות הנקראים ארכיבים וביבליותקים ובפרט בעיר לונדון, עיר הממלכה. Through his reading, Birkenthal says he has learned, and this is the sort of kicker, he has learned מה שלא נודע לנו מכל ספרי קבלתנו. In a substantial section of Birkenthal's introduction to the book Divrei Binah, he cites various rabbinic and especially Sephardic authorities in an effort to defend and justify his study of Gentile languages and Gentile wisdom. Among these is the 16th century commentary on the rabbinic injunction that one must da mashet tashiv la pikoros. In Lechem Yehuda by Shmuel Lerma, he quotes what Shmuel Lerma has to say accurately, but then he inserts the words, and one should read their books. It's not there in Lerma's book, but Birkenthal inserts it in the middle of the quotation, and he says that that means those of the heretics, which are not, and this passage is invented by our Polish wine merchant. What he's doing here is advocating learning for its own sake. And he's attaching a positive valuation to broadening his reading and his understanding of the world beyond the limits of the Jewish canon. We might say that Birkenthal presents himself here as a broker of cultural interchange, as standing on the border of the Jewish community, even standing guard on the border of the Jewish community. Birkenthal represents more than merely a type of transcultural commercial cosmopolitanism. His aspirations, particularly his composition of two literary works, betray an ambition beyond the achievement of worldliness in the service of economic benefit. Much of the literature on the question of Jewish attitudes to Christians is based on normative sources, and some scholars explain what are termed moderate positions on the part of rabbis on the basis of commercial necessity, and in that way seemingly dismiss them as insignificant. Commercial relations were indeed sometimes of the sort in which there was little interaction between buyer and seller, but just as often there was a great deal more to the matter than that, since credit frequently involved, what was frequently involved, there had to be a measure of trust between the buyer and the seller. In Birkenthal's writings, one of the very few cases where a person's confession is not mentioned, he refers to having made a commercial agreement in a town in Hungary with a person that he designates Adam Batuach, without saying whether the person was a Jew or not. The religion of the person is just not germane. What is crucial is what he says, that the person is worthy of trust. In other words, one need not be in Venice. Even in 18th century Poland, we can ask Portia's question, which is the merchant here and which the Jew? When speaking generally, Birkenthal indicts especially the Polish Catholic clergy for spreading slanderous lies about the Jews that led to their being accused of ritual murder and of desecration of the host. But in his specific encounters with Catholic priests, he makes distinctions. Some clergymen are in fact malevolent. But others, like his friend Franciszek Wieniawski, the general canon of the Lwów Cathedral and the manager of the town of Bolechów, those people and that priest was trustworthy and reliable. Thus far, Birkenthal's attitudes to his non-Jewish interlocutors have proven to indicate a nuanced and complex understanding of differences in character and reliability. Gentiles were very far indeed from being an undifferentiated collectivity. To illustrate this another way, there are 14 cases in which Birkenthal refers to people Miyodai umakirai, to whom he was a well-known acquaintance. Of these, 2 are Jews. There are 14 of them. 2 are Jews. One of those Jews turns out to be a thief. That is, Birkenthal thought he knew him, but his trust was betrayed. The non-Jews include a variety of people, including some Hungarian teamsters who help him when he's trying to find wagons for his wines when the roads were flooded. The servants of the Castellan, Piotr Branicki, who helped to arrange for Birkenthal to be the supplier of wine to the wedding of the Castellan's daughter to a sapiecha. 8 are noblemen. And there's a certain Lukowski, who was a member of the Lwów City Council, and there was a Mr. Marzi, the manager of the wine cellars of Count Butler in Tarchal, Hungary, with whom Birkenthal indicates he was particularly close. He designates him as a person to whom he was very well known, Miyodai umakirai me'od. The most unqualified expression of friendship. Birkenthal says, he was well acquainted and beloved to him, Miyodai umakirai ve'ohavai me'od. Good luck translating that too. Regards a young Schlachtic called Zaremba, who had traveled to Hungary as a clerk with Birkenthal to record his purchases of wine on behalf of the town administrator, that same priest, Franciszek Wieniawski. Apparently, Birkenthal earned the young man's respect and friendship, which he says continued for many years thereafter. Birkenthal's interactions with non-Jews were frequent and frequently meaningful. He reports substantive discussions of matters not related to commerce with people like a German merchant, with Joachim Potocki, with Kazimierz Pułaski, that Saxon clerk, Labady, and with a person he calls a Russian general, who turned out, I checked, he turned out to be a colonel, but it doesn't matter. He eventually became a general. His often pejorative remarks about Christianity and Christians are almost always couched in general language and do not refer to specific individuals. And when he does relate to these people, he doesn't say, even though he's a Gentile, something. He doesn't say that. In sum, after this very short review of some of the evidence, we can say that this particular 18th century Polish Jew was profoundly imbricated in the multi-confessional and multi-ethnic society in which he lived. The way Jews saw their neighbors in the 18th century is not subject to a simple unidimensional description without serious distortion of the actual situation. The Jewish view of Gentiles was both labile and fractal, to use a term coined by another Polish Jew, labile and fractal, in the sense that fractal things show complexity at every level of magnification. Thank you very much.